and a very warm welcome to this executive morning brief under the topic of the EU Sustainability Omnibus, kind of frame. So where do we go from here? I know it's a very hot topic and a lot of interesting things are going on. So it's a great pleasure to host this event for you. My name is Mette Amdi, and I'm a program manager here at CBS Executive Fonden, where we have the pleasure of hosting a series of online sessions like these with a various range of interesting topics within the sustainability agenda. And today I'm very pleased to present to you a dialogue between two of the absolute leading voices within sustainability. We have with us today, all the way from Finland, Heidi Hautala. I hope I pronounce it correctly, Heidi. Heidi used to serve as the Vice President of the European Parliament from 2017 till 2024. And she is a longtime advocate for responsible business conduct and human rights. And she has been a leading voice in shaping the EU legislation on corporate sustainability, due diligence, and transparency. And today she is serving as an advisor for a wide range of NGOs and organizations globally. So a very warm welcome to you, Heidi. It's such a pleasure that you will stay with us here today and enlighten us on a lot of the things you know around this topic. And also our very own Andreas Rasche, who is a professor here at CBS and a leading researcher within sustainable business practices, corporate responsibility, and the role of business in global governance. And Professor Rasche is also advising international corporations on integrating sustainability into strategy and governance. Also a great pleasure to see you this morning, Andreas. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you.
So today we will have a discussion on what is on the mind of many of, I guess, all of you listening in these days, the EU Omnibus simplification package that rolls back key aspects of the CSRD and the CSDDD. And for the next approximately 40 minutes, Andreas and Heidi will debate the recent compromise that was reached in the European Parliament and also discuss the further legislative process from here and on. And we are, as you know, running for the next more or less 40 minutes. And if you have questions, and we kind of urge you to ask questions along the way, please do it in the Q&A function. And then Andreas will monitor what comes in and see how many of the questions he can actually drag into the conversation. But please do remember to write short questions. Otherwise, with so many attendees, it can be a little bit tricky to kind of overview all of the questions. But just put it in the Q&A as we go, and then we'll try to pick up on that. Also, I need to say that the session here will be recorded and sent to you afterwards as well. So let's dig right into it, Andreas and Heidi. So where does the Omnibus discussion currently stand? Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Mette, and thank you, Heidi, for having this conversation with me. It's a big pleasure to have you. And let's dig right in. Where do we stand after the compromise, particularly on the legal process side? There was quite a bit of confusion around this in terms of also, do we go for a plenary vote? The jury committee itself kind of voted on going directly to interinstitutional negotiations, so the trilogue. Can you give us your insights and your take on where do we stand?
Yeah, thanks very much, Andreas. Indeed, there was also a confusion about what happens after last Monday's vote in the Legal Affairs Committee, because maybe it went a bit unnoticed that the committee asked for a direct mandate, which it has to bring to the Parliament's vote this week, this Wednesday, I believe, to go directly to the trilogue negotiations, which is the kind of final shaping of the let's say, the revised CSDDD and CSRD, or if the Parliament actually wants to have a sort of full discussion and vote on the content. So this is where we are now, and nobody can really predict what happens on Wednesday. What is sure that towards the end of the year, there will be the trilogue negotiations between the Council and the Parliament to get the final final shape of the directives. But it's politically very tense because on one hand, there are those who say that the outcome of the Legal Affairs Committee in terms of substance is, well, it's not good for many, but it has some potential. And if it goes through a full plenary vote in the European Parliament, and that would happen in November, I believe, it could be weakened. So, but nobody really knows, so we'll have to see.
We will have to see, and that kind of also, I almost think, has been the spirit of the entire omnibus process. That it was very accelerated at times, and things happened quite quickly. But good to know what is happening this Wednesday. So important for everybody here online. The vote on Wednesday is not directly on the omnibus itself, but it is on the mandate to enter into interinstitutional negotiations. So don't confuse this. Heidi, let's talk a bit about the omnibus compromise that was reached in the Parliament. I think there are many aspects to it, in particular the scope. I think, as you know and as others know, I've also been quite critical of this extreme de-scoping. The Parliament, at the end of the day, aligned very well with the Council position. What do you make out of the scope? I mean, we see on the CSRD minus 90%, and we see on the CSDDD minus 70%. This is very, very significant, I think.
Yes, and I have to say that as I was part of the negotiation team on the original CSDDD, we already went through many concessions, including on the scope. So it got less and less and less companies in scope on the CSDDD. The question is that how far down can the scope go without the legislation losing its meaning? And maybe it's not a good idea to give a final judgment today, because there is still room for improving. I think many believe that as the positions of the Council and the Parliament are quite well aligned on the scope, on the number of companies addressed by this legislation, so there's not much hope to get more into the scope. But I'm not so sure, because I remember very well that the European Commission has warned touching the scope, because it was already a very tough discussion in the earlier stages. So I think it's of course true that the meaning of this legislation will become much reduced if even in some smaller EU member states, an extremely small number of companies would be addressed by both. And what about those who have already started to practice sustainability reporting and due diligence? So it's a slap against their face.
Exactly. I think that's also something I think that policymakers in this entire simplification drive almost forgot, I think. I mean, they looked so much into the compliance cost issue that all the other things, the benefits, but also the costs that have already appeared on the company side, they were more or less neglected, right? So
Andreas, let me ask you one thing, because I've seen that the Copenhagen Business School and your department has done a lot of lots of studies about what the impact of this legislation will be. So what are the sort of economic consequences of the legislation? Is it true that competitiveness and sustainability are adversaries, are enemies to each other? This prevailing narrative. What have you found out about this competitiveness versus the sustainability regulation?
I mean, it's a wrong narrative. I think that is being put up here by the Commission, by the Council, and also by the Parliament. There is no empirical evidence, that sustainability and competitiveness are directly kind of opposed to each other. I must say there is also not that much evidence, that there is always green growth and always win-win. I think we need to be careful with these kind of things. But I think the hope of some policymakers that by cutting compliance costs, companies will become awfully more competitive, I think this is misguided. And this is also simply because competitiveness, academically speaking and practically speaking, is a very complex phenomenon. You know, you don't just talk about cost cuts. What you also talk about, for instance, is access to skilled labor, access to infrastructure, access to R&D innovation. So these are things, I think, where companies would actually need to reinvest the money that they now save, a bit of money that they save into these things in order really to strengthen competitiveness. So, you know, just slashing a legislation, this is something that we also discussed here at CBS quite a bit, just slashing a legislation itself doesn't actually deliver on competitiveness. So I think this is wishful thinking, and regulating by wishful thinking is never good. So
Sure.
I think we should stick to the empirics. But Heidi, another area of the compromise were the climate transition plans, also kind of a key element of the CSDDD. And you know, when I read the compromise, I was like, why in the world were implementation measures deleted from this? I mean, that doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, now companies are asked to adopt plans, but they don't have to tell anyone what they're actually doing in terms of actions. What was your, or what is your reaction to that?
I think it's not rational. Because originally, when the EU Justice Commissioner Didier Reynders gave the proposal in 2022, he made it very clear that the climate transition plans in the CSDDD were a kind of a protection to companies against litigation and harm. So now this campaign against the transition plans seems very awkward. It was also perhaps the best way to incorporate the Paris climate agreement into a regulation that is dealing with companies. It was not so simple. But also when we see that the climate change is climate crisis, I have to say, is accelerating, the International Court of Justice has ruled that companies have a duty to protect the climate as a human right. And that also applies to companies in a certain way. So I believe that this is the part of the overall strategy of the rapporteur, Mr. Warborn, whom I call Mr. Simplification, because I've seen how his mission really is to only to reduce the administrative burden of companies, irregardless, in my view, on the content and implications. So this is another attempt to alleviate the burden of companies. But I believe that in today's world, it is misguided, just as well it is misguided that to reduce the scope of this legislation, as we just discussed. So there's no rationale to it, I think, other than administrative burden, which can also be a bit misguided.
Yeah. And another issue, I think, that we had a lot of discussion around with the civil liability, right? The civil liability issue, lots of discussions around that, and I think that was probably also one of the deal breakers in the end. I mean, that was one of the reasons why Warborn threatened also to go with the far right because they didn't strike a deal on that. You know, what I wonder is, I mean, the goal is simplification according to Warborn, but if you end up with 27 different civil liability regimes, I mean, this in itself cannot be simplification. So I also wonder, and this question was also asked during a press conference to him on Monday. I mean, why in the world should this be counting as simplification? I guess you have a pretty similar take on this, but it's very disappointing that even on those issues where it is actually obvious that he complicates things much more, or the EPP is complicating things much more, they are not willing to compromise, right?
Yeah, right. I think we can all agree that the Omnibus proposal has no real impact assessment. It has had no proper public consultation, whereas the original legislation did have quite an extensive impact assessment and consultation. So it perhaps it's again, I think it's a bit like, well, should I say again that it's not rational? It's based on some very vague idea that the member states will escape some unnecessary burden from Brussels by adding a European dimension to this legislation. So Warborn decided to take that away. But for a moment, I think we can also pay attention to the original idea of this legislation, which is to protect people and the planet from harm. And I'm a disciple of John Ruggie, who created the UN Guiding Principles of Business and Human Rights, which still very much qualify as a basis for action for companies. And I mean, there were the three pillars. The states have the duty to protect human rights, the companies have a duty to respect them, and victims of wrongdoings and failures by companies, serious failures, the victims need to have access to justice. So in a way, by challenging the idea of proper access to justice for victims, the EPP has kind of denied the whole foundation of this legislation. And as we know, in today's world, companies are objects of litigations on violations of human rights, climate destruction, etc. So there will be no ultimate protection, even if this will be removed. It just makes things very complicated for companies, as you say. And lastly, I need to say that we managed to put in this article on civil liability in a way that it gives the duty to member states to apply their own legislation where the harm has occurred in a third country, perhaps in a quite, let's say, hostile environment, insufficient legal environment. We have these magical words overriding mandatory application of the provisions by member states, and that's all gone. So less protection for victims, more complication for companies. No sense at all.
But maybe also asking a bit around the tier 1 or tier N approach that we had in the compromise. A lot of people, and I recently talked to Richard Howitt and Julia Otten from Frank Bold in another podcast, and actually quite a lot of people said, well, the Parliament actually pushed it a little bit more towards the UNGPs, right, the UN Guiding Principles. So on this sense, on the due diligence approach, actually, they were a little bit more progressive than the Council. What do you expect here, also for the trilogues? I mean, has the Parliament a good position here?
Yes. Well, first of all, I think now we have come to the last sort of really meaningful part of what needs to be addressed. The question of following the so-called risk-based approach, where companies look for the most salient adverse impacts on business, on human rights and environment in their value chains. So I think it is true, but why did this happen? I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that some businesses really felt very much restricted by the way Mr. Warborn proposed, and also the Council, even the Commission. They wanted to restrict the freedom of the companies to look properly into their value chains to identify adverse impacts. But I had my Business Europe moment sometime in the spring when I thought it was the 1st of April. It wasn't. It was after 1st of April, when I read that Business Europe had second thoughts about their position. And many other business leaders also have joined, privately or publicly, saying that actually we need to go back to the proper risk-based approach, which is also based on the UN Guiding Principles. So I think that's the only way that their Mr. Warborn had to listen to the business voice. He didn't listen to the voice of the progressive companies elsewhere so much. But here, yes, I think there's a slight success, but it's still a little bit confusing how it's written. Don't you think?
Yeah. Yes, I agree. I mean, when I read it, I was like, okay, it's to me also, it wasn't entirely clear where exactly, for instance, the tier N approach kicks in and where information restrictions apply. I mean, that is, I think that is something that needs to be now worked out in the trilogue. But you know, one interesting thing that I thought was there was this CEO letter, this famous letter that came out like 1.5 weeks ago or so around the Evian summit, where some companies actually called for the complete abolishment of the CSDDD. And now it turns out, and I posted on this also during the weekend, that some companies didn't even know that their name or that it was written on their behalf. Let's put it that way. The letter was written by the CEOs of Total Energies and Siemens and now some of the companies, they start to distance themselves, but also some of the companies say they are okay with the content of the letter. Of course, these kind of interventions usually also do not help, but they seem to align quite a bit with the political realities in Berlin and Paris, because both Macron and also Merz, they have indicated that they are quite critical of the CSDDD.
Yeah.
What do you make out of that?
Yeah, first of all, I think we are coming to a very exciting topic now. Who has had a say on this whole? And we have to notice that the ones that actually also wanted to tear into pieces the trilogue agreement on the CSDDD close to 2 years ago, after the trilogue negotiations, which was unprecedented. They were also Germany, France, plus Italy. And it was a very dirty deal, the game they were playing to get what they wanted. It was also some sort of blackmailing and coercion. So we who defended the trilogue agreement, we had to make one concession after the other on the scope, on some other things. So now the same forces are trying again. And we know that Chancellor Merz and President Macron, they have made these outcries that this is terrible and we have to get rid of the CSDDD and maybe also of the CSRD. So what can I say? I believe that it reveals the kind of inconsistency and double standards of some of the companies. Okay, now they say that they may not have been consciously a part of the letter, that they didn't even perhaps know. But I mean, is this responsible behavior? I don't think so. And now we can clearly see that some companies have both supported the CSDDD, and now they a month later, they say, no, we don't want it. I mean, it shows that there's also no consistent approach within a number of big companies who are very influential in this. So it's very unfortunate, and I believe that there may be another letter that has been directed to more than just Merz and Macron, namely to all EU leaders who are going to have a European Council meeting, which is like the top European decision-making body, on Thursday this week. And to my knowledge, the simplification agenda will be discussed in the Council. Maybe it doesn't get as much attention as this situation in Ukraine, but it will be mentioned, I believe. So we will see what kind of pressure there is to sort of go along at the level of the whole European Council against this legislation. And that's why the trilogue negotiations are quite important now.
Yes, definitely. And sticking a bit with the lobbying, I mean, a lot of people wonder, and we have also one question on this here. I mean, the Commission proposal is there, the Council position is there, the Parliament compromise is halfway there. We're not entirely sure yet, but we at least know the basic pillars. Is there still room? What do you think for companies to kind of raise their voices, to speak out on this? I mean, is this still something that they should do?
Yeah. I mean, you are working in Denmark. I'm working mainly now at home in Finland. So I think we have seen that on average, Nordic companies are quite puzzled about the situation. And many of them are openly saying that they actually need this legislation that is now at stake, because they have adjusted their company practices. They find that it is good business strategy to be responsible and that they want a level playing field. So I think the game is far from being over, and maybe it's just in my nature that I've seen so many defeats on the way that I don't think it's time to give up now. And companies can still express themselves. The key points that we mentioned already, Andreas, were the scope, the risk-based approach, the civil liability, and maybe there could be a little bit more, but I think these are the transition plans for climate. Yes. So these four things are still disputed. And if you look at how the sort of council position of the 27 member states came into being, it was far from unanimous. There were member states, including Denmark and Finland, who said that, look, we can live with the civil liability. We actually believe that there's a case for going back to the risk-based approach. So there are divisions within the Council where you have a number of member states who could still sort of make new alliances, and half of the Parliament almost is supporting
exactly.
that. So there could be new constellations, and the companies can now express themselves on what they need.
Exactly, and I think it's so important. I mean, that's why I also took the question. And by the way, thanks all for sending the questions. I'm just scrolling through the questions here. It is very important that businesses keep on raising their voice, and also that other stakeholders keep on raising their voice. So this is not a completely done deal yet. Also because, as Heidi said, I mean, the Council, and there are still different positions, but also in the Parliament, as you said, right? I mean, it's also that that not all MEPs out of the different political groups necessarily neatly agree on this deal. So I think that's why it's important to remain vocal on this. A question by Christina Knoll on the Ombudswoman, which is an interesting side aspect of the entire Omnibus process. For those of you who don't know, the EU has a kind of independent watchdog, the so-called Ombudswoman. And there was a complaint by several NGOs with regard to the Omnibus process, that the Omnibus process doesn't align with the EU Commission's own better regulation guidelines. Heidi, also with your knowledge of European institutions, what do you think could be the impact here of the Ombudswoman's approach once she comes out with her final verdict, so to say?
Yeah. Her competence is to give recommendations, but they are, let's say that they come with some authority. And I think all the European ombudsmen so far, I think now we have the fourth one, have been able to show that good governance is really a foundation for the EU: transparency, integrity, accountability. So what we know is that the new European Ombudsman, she's from Portugal, she's a very respected lawyer and human rights expert. So she was not happy with the first answers by the Commission, and I think she has pressed the Commission even further. The problem is that the Commission is referring to the urgency of saving European Union's competitiveness. So we come back to what you said, Andreas, that this narrative on competitiveness requiring dismantling sustainability legislation is still very much in this discussion. And maybe the Ombudswoman could sort of highlight the sort of fragile foundation of this narrative. As you said, there is nothing in reality that shows that it is true. So we will have to see, but at least it exposes the kind of deviation from what used to be before called better lawmaking. So better lawmaking standards, including impact assessments and public consultations. But now it's urgency of saving the European Union's competitiveness. That is the kind of overarching goal for the European Commission. And I think it is so deceptive that I must say that after my 20 years in the European Parliament altogether, I didn't believe that I would have to come to see this. And compare it with the United States. It's, like Trump's executive orders, because there's a national emergency. So we have a bit of we have a transatlantic problem here. It's not just that Trump is putting pressure on the EU, it's coming from inside the EU as well. So we see kind of a very, in my point of view, in my very humbly subjective point of view, it's a kind of a regressive transatlantic connection that is now emerging, and it's very damaging for the European democracy, and I would say for business and sustainability.
Yeah, I fully agree with you on this, Heidi, because I think we see we cannot just blame it on the Americans, right? I mean, this is what you also see in some comments, that sometimes people say, yeah, well, the Americans push us towards these things. No, I mean, the pressure is coming very clearly also from within Europe. It's coming from Paris, it's coming from Berlin, and from other capitals here. So I think it is very clear that the second term of von der Leyen is a very, very different term in terms of also policy priorities. Although I already saw it, and probably you as well, I already saw towards the end of her last term, I think there you already saw that things changed, I think, with regard to the simplification agenda. I mean, these discussions started, I would say, in early 2024, maybe even in late 23, right? So we have lots of questions, particularly also around the legal process. So I'm trying to group them a little bit together. Lots of questions around what happens really here if, in the case that the Parliament might reject the compromise. So let's say on Wednesday, maybe we get a vote that it has to be put to plenary. So then the vote will be in November. 11th to 13th November is the next session. What happens if the Parliament, if the plenary rejects the compromise of the Legal Affairs Committee?
Well, yeah. So just to make it again clear, as we tried earlier, that the vote on Wednesday is the rejection of the right of the Legal Affairs Committee mandate to go directly to the trilogues or not. But again, of course, if there will be a full vote in the plenary, it comes with amendments. And be sure there will be those proposals to reject the whole legislation. I think they have been on the table all the time. So I just, maybe I have a psychological issue here, because that would be a kind of a final defeat in a way, right? So I refuse to see that possibility, and there's still possibility to prevent that from happening by companies talking to the MEPs and so on. But if the Parliament's compromise would be, if the Parliament's position on the legislation would be full rejections, well, that's a tricky question, because we have current enforced CSRD and CSDDD. So would that be the end of the Omnibus 1 or not? Now we need a legal expert to clarify that.
Exactly.
But that would be my sort of non-lawyer's perspective to what could happen.
Exactly. That, of course, it is a very unlikely scenario. But we also have lots of questions around the trilogues, Heidi, and you've been very long with the Parliament, with the political institutions. Can you shed some light on what is actually happening in these trilogue negotiations? Because these are informal negotiations, right? So there is not kind of a lot of transparency around them, or a lot of public insights that we could gain.
It's first of all, it's true that both the Council and regrettably the Parliament also want to protect the informal nature of these negotiations. But there is a court case, and this is something for everyone to know, that actually the documents from the trilogue negotiations, which are joint documents by the Council, Commission and Parliament, they are public to those who request them. The problem is that they change every day or every week. So the institutions have the possibilities to say that we don't have a current document available. But there is a court case. It was quite an important one. So there was an attempt indeed to shed some light on these negotiations. But of course, as always, there will be leaks. But having been a long time transparency activist, and here I'm very proud of my Nordic heritage of public access to information. I have to say that the way that the institutions are now handling these negotiations is not good. There will be leaks, but leaks are never the same as public access to information. But some should use this public access to information to ask for the documents from the trilogues. There will be resistance, but there's a legal right.
Exactly. So we have two co-legislators, and the Commission usually has a kind of more facilitating role in this, the role of facilitator, advisor, expert opinion. We discussed earlier the scope. On the scope, there is really a big difference between the Parliament and the Council and the Commission, or maybe not a big, but a significant difference. Or do you expect that the Commission might push in a direction for the scope to maybe go further down?
Well, I think they would be a little less eager to do so because they can see that because of the pressure, notably from France, the scope has now been, the threshold is now extremely high, 5,000 employees and so on. But they might want to say that it's very unfortunate that the scope is now, that the threshold is now so high and the scope so limited. So I hope that the Commission has the guts to give their view, but we don't know.
And we have a lot of questions also on how all of this plays out towards the end. So I think the last day, this is at least what I've heard, the last day of the trilogue scheduled is 8th of December. What happens then, Heidi? So they find a compromise in the trilogue, and then of course it needs to be voted on again by the institutions.
Yes, and there will be some, let's say, a period of what they would call technical legal scrubbing. But then, you know, they have to see that the text is somehow legally consistent, of course, based on the political agreement that the Council and the Parliament have then signed. And let's just once more remember that when the original CSDDD trilogue outcome had been adopted in, it must have been, let me think, December 23, then due to the pressure from France, Germany and Italy, the negotiations, it was reopened. I'm not sure that this would happen this time, but it's been a very, very sort of peculiar deviation from any good lawmaking standards. But okay, let's say that if there will be an agreement between the Council and the Parliament, somehow assisted by the Commission, then yeah, a bit legal scrubbing, and then both institutions have to sign it into law. And then there will be an enforcement date. So that,
we talk about early 26, probably in terms of the final.
I think so. Yeah, but I mean, nobody knows if the outcome of the trilogue is on the 8th of December. In a way, I would say that I have some hopes, and here I have a question to you, because I've seen that Denmark, as a member state, has in some instances defended the legislation. But how would they act as a presidency? And do you think then, as a member state, does Denmark still has some, so let's say, more moderate views? And could they still defend the integrity of the legislation? Or are they just acting as a kind of an honest broker?
I certainly hope so. I mean, it's of course I'm by no means speaking on behalf of the Danish government, but what I heard at least is that also one of the ministers, Morten Bødskov here, I mean, he also made clear that he wants kind of to retain also, of course, the integrity of the due diligence regulation. And he made the statement, I think, in the Financial Times after there was all this pressure by Merz and Macron. So he said, look, I mean, we should not go overboard with all this. So my hope is also that Denmark will play a very constructive role here in the trilogue negotiations, because as they hold the presidency right now, they will or I hope that they will assume more than just the role of the expert facilitator, and to really also intervene, make constructive suggestions, trying to also maybe push the compromise in a more constructive direction. But obviously we do not know. Recently I saw or I was also on a panel with someone from the Danish government, and there it sounded a bit more like, you know, the usual simplification agenda, but this was also quite focused on reporting, I must say. So I think they might be a little bit also divided on the reporting and the due diligence side. At least this is my perspective from the outside. Heidi, there is a question here by Irina de Smet, and I think it's a great question, and that's why I just want to take it actually as it is. Taking a broader and long-term perspective, current political processes aside, what is the smart way for businesses to navigate in this space strategically, to remain resilient and competitive? Okay,
so this would deserve an answer from you as well. But okay, if I can start, I believe that we have to see that accountable, responsible business, I think it is a global trend. even mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence is a global trend. No matter what the EU will do right now, the EU's U-turn will have some discouraging impact on other countries in Southeast Asia, maybe Canada, maybe Australia. But the long term, I think, for companies is that they need to address the expectations of the stakeholders of the society. So I think the pendulum will at one point swing back again. When is the question? And of course, this is in a way speculation, but now the pendulum is against sustainability, but the global challenges have not disappeared anywhere. So, and how should companies react? I think maybe that's for you more, maybe simply from my side. I believe that many companies have seen that looking into the value chain, having due diligence can also be a part of a smart business strategy, and it can also bring efficiency and certainly protection against the failures of respecting human rights and what would you say?
And I fully agree. I always try to summarize it by kind of saying, the question is not whether sustainability will be prioritized again. The question in the end is whether organizations will be prepared when it is. And I think this is something, this preparedness that needs to happen now. That's why I think just kind of saying, oh, all of this is a compliance exercise, we are out, and we have seen these reactions. This is, I think, a very non-reflective stance, and these companies, I think, in a short period of time, they will also need to rethink this, because the markets are moving on. Business partners are asking different questions. Investors are asking different questions. The ECB, the European Central Bank, rightly made an intervention here with regard to the Omnibus process, where they said, please use a threshold of 500 because it is more reasonable. So I think companies need to think, and there are different ways to do this. This is not the right place to discuss it, but they need to really think more long term. This is also a question of corporate governance at the end of the day, and we are too damn short term in our thinking. And once we get to the long term thinking, for instance, by incentivizing people differently, by also setting up governance structures that actually allow for long term thinking, then I think we get to the good stuff. And then we also don't need to discuss every couple of years whether, it is a legal responsibility or legal obligation and what has changed, because then you do it because it's values driven and it's driven by a long-term interest. So that would be that would be my response to that. I know we're running out of time, Heidi. One very quick question before I hand it back to Mette. What do you expect for the future of the simplification agenda? We have a lot that is coming up. We have an environmental omnibus that is coming up. We have the SFDR simplification that is coming up. Do you think we will see similar, and there were also a couple of questions on this, do you think we will see similar significant reductions in terms of what is there?
Yeah, on those two things, the omnibus on environmental legislation, I'm afraid that many member states are quite murderous in their sentiments towards some of the laws. We saw it already. I think you mentioned that in early 2024, we started to see some shifts away from sustainability because European elections approaching, the need to please unhappy voters, farmers, etc. So I'm concerned, and we don't know exactly what this massive public consultation brought to the environmental omnibus, but at worst, I think it's something to really, really watch out. On the financial markets, you mentioned the European Central Bank's position on the need to have data for the investors. So I actually think that if the finance sector has their say there, I'm maybe not in the position to judge properly, but I would be surprised if there would be less transparency requirement, less data requirements for investors. So in that sense, there's only what we saw in the shaping of the CSDDD is that the banking sector, the finance sector of France was very much concerned about the CSDDD. I don't know what damage they could do this time, but they certainly managed to sort of escape almost every responsibility in the CSDDD, because they are so powerful, and France was so eager to follow their wish. So let's watch for who is lobbying for what. We need to have the good lobbyists who are speaking in favor of sustainability, and who stick together and who make public statements, whether from company side or from the civil society side. But that would be my estimate on what could happen.
Thank you so very much, Heidi, for being here this morning with me, for having this conversation. It was a big pleasure, and I think we share lots of opinions, and yeah, it was great to have this conversation with you. Thank you for you all online for all your questions. We didn't get through all of them. It was simply impossible. I tried to do my very best to group them together and to weave them into the conversation with Heidi. So Heidi, big thank you to you, and
thank you, Andreas. Thank you so much, and Mette.
Thank you from my side as well, and thank you for your time, both you guys and all of those listening in. And I just want to say, because I could see that some people were entering the room a little bit later in the conversation, but don't worry, to you guys, we'll send you the link to the recording so you can see it from the beginning. You will probably receive it during tomorrow, so don't panic. We'll send you a mail with that, and also with invitation for our next morning brief coming up in December, but more info on that later on. But thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, both of you, Andreas and Heidi, and to all of you out there, please keep up the good work. Thank you so much for your time. See you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.